ABC and CBS, controlling interest in the media mess. TV guy, bug-eyed monster with a video eye, selling me junk that I never want to buy. Won't you show me what I ought to see? How you suck me, how you fuck me till I can't be free. TV guy, 1,000 glassy smiles for 1 billion nightly viewers, selling dollar garbage in the media sewers. Sell England in America, America in France, sell you back your ass in a fancy pair of pants.
The following program is a realistic depiction of fictional events. None of what you're about to see is actually happening.
Good evening, I'm Frank Reynolds, and this is World News Tonight.
Coming up, police flood the subway tonight in another blitz on lawbreakers. But is it working?
A tragedy in Alabama raises the question, when should news people stop doing their job and start getting involved?
The drug boss they call Mr. Untouchable turns on his old gang.
It's 10 p.m. Do you know where your children are?
Thousands of people who work for the state of New York will be getting pink slips. A job is something that Liz and Dick don't have to worry about. They are about to become the highest paid performers ever on Broadway.
According to the White House, Mrs. Reagan does not normally use cue cards when she talks on the phone with the president. Stephen Gear, ABC News, Hollywood.
Oh, dear.
Thank you, Steve.
If it concerns you, it concerns us.
News 4.
This has been a presentation of News 4 New York, which has been honored by the United Press International State Broadcasters for the best regularly scheduled news program. Downhill racing in an inner tube on More Real People tomorrow at 4:30.
I'm Roger Mudd, NBC News, Washington.
I'm Tom Brokaw, NBC News, New York.
Watch the new Four Squares later today on most of these RBS stations. Next, betrayal and remembrance in the continuing saga of love and life in Morningside. Move on up to RBS.
We interrupt our regular programming to bring you this special bulletin from RBS News.
That's Channel 2 News. If it concerns you, it concerns us.
And if it concerns us, we should actually pay some attention to them. This is Brian Winston. As you can see this evening, Paper Tiger Television is playing at being the news, which was why we fouled up at the beginning. I apologize for that. The news is the sharp end of television production. It's the thing that people worry about most, next, of course, to sex violence and kid vids. The news, however, is a very peculiar institution. It's full of astonishing conventions and constraints. It says it's going to tell us about the real world, but the way it does it is in a very strange, almost fairy tale sort of way. One of the things that news people are terribly good at, and which, as you've already seen this evening, we're not so hot at, is running down to videotape. I'm going to play you a bit of videotape, which I'm sure is quite familiar to you. Can we play it? We can't play it. Oh, well, I just got to keep talking until the videotape comes up. Will somebody tell me when the videotape is there? Oh, look, this is it. Right.
So it brings mine back to Broadway. Joel Siegel has a most unusual review from Eyewitness News at 11 o'clock tonight here on Channel 7 New York. Now from New York, here is ABC's World News Tonight.
Now stop it right there for a second. Let's just look at this, right? This is a very typical beginning of a news program. In fact, it contains, in the words March the 9th, 1983, almost the only hard fact you're likely to get in the 22 minutes you spend watching it. This also, unlike the sort of logos that seem to reflect the world and indicate that the news is dealing with the world, this opening title is absolutely honest. It's set in a TV control room. It tells you very firmly that the program we are about to watch has not very much to do with the world, but a hell of a lot to do with television. Let's see how it goes on.
Good evening, I'm Frank Reynolds, and this is World News Tonight. The scandal at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has taken a dramatic turn now. The agency's chief, Ann Gorsuch-Burford, has just resigned at the White House. Ann Compton, our White House correspondent, is there right now and has the story. Ann?
Frank, when the end came, it came very quickly. It was 4 o'clock this afternoon when Ann Gorsuch-Burford telephoned the White House, asked to see the president, and when she arrived here with her husband at about an hour later, she handed in her resignation. She met with President Reagan for about 25 minutes and with the White House counselor Ed Meese, who had been somewhat of her contact, her angel here at the White House. We are told that it was Ann Burford's own decision on whether to resign and whether to resign now, but clearly it came after the White House had worked out an acceptable deal with Congress to hand over all of the documents in the EPA controversy, not only the portions that were open and already offered, but the deleted portions, which now will be safely kept by the members of the committees on Capitol Hill, the very committees who had been complaining about the president's use of executive privilege. Mrs. Burford will not be thrown out of the administration altogether. After all, it was not her environmental views that had her in trouble. It was the political tangle around her agency. She will be found another job in the administration, and John Hernandez, her deputy, will become acting director of the EPA. Frank?
Frank?
This is Bettina Gregory. Burford's resignation was part of a deal worked out here on Capitol Hill. Late today, the White House agreed to turn over the documents that Congress has subpoenaed. All day long, White House counsel Fred Fielding came in and out of the office of Congressman John Dingell. But late this afternoon, Fielding agreed to turn over all EPA documents subpoenaed by the Dingell subcommittee. The agreement says the EPA will designate information it considers to be, quote, enforcement sensitive, and the committee will consider that information in executive session. The key point is the subcommittee will get to have, not just to see, these EPA documents. It means that Dingell won.
It is everything that the subcommittee has subpoenaed. And the EPA and the administration and Mr. Broyhill have, I think, brought us to a very...
These guys, yeah, I mean, I'm just fed up with these tall people, white people, talking to me. So let's leave them alone. Come back to me and I'll say something about this. The really interesting thing that's going on here is that, you know, the news as it happens, this was World News Tonight leaving their normal presentational techniques and doing something, you know, leading with a breaking story. It's terribly exciting when that sort of thing happens. The news is actually, essentially, people talking to you, like I'm talking to you now. It consists of a bunch of high-priced talent and a bunch of the rich and powerful in the world endlessly talking to camera or to each other. We actually eavesdrop on that, more or less. That's really one of the first points that one would want to make in a story like this, that it shows the limits of what's supposed to be an extremely visual medium. If you listen to television news professionals, they'll tell you how they're constantly busting a gut to get you these pictures. And what do the pictures actually consist of? Well, as you could see in this particular example, they largely consist of people in close-ups talking to you. There's another point I want to make about doing the thing live as it happens. They turn out, like the people in this studio and myself, to be really mortals like the rest of us. They are actually not very good at talking off the top of their heads. They need scripts, they need organization, and when they don't have it, they get into terrible trouble and difficulties. The important thing, however, is that despite all of the talk, the protestations about the tyranny of the pictures, newsmen claim to be totally unbiased, totally uninvolved, absolutely accurate reporters of events, but occasionally they'll admit that they do love good pictures. The reason they make this admission is that they clearly don't. Let's roll the next bit of tape and I'll show you another example of what I mean. This comes from a rival news network. I don't know who the gentleman is, but I understand that he is, in fact, a pretty popular guy. We don't seem to be anywhere near it at the moment. I thought we were close. It's from a CBS News a few weeks ago, a few days ago, I should say.
World News Tonight. Brought to you by Ford Motor Company.
If it concerns you, it concerns us.
Halfway through the evening news broadcast.
The Soviet Union today ordered the expulsion of an American diplomat assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, charging that he was a spy. The Russians said that he had been caught, quote, red-handed. He was identified as Richard W. Osborne, a first secretary in the embassy's economic section. He arrived in Moscow last August. The Soviet government newspaper Izvestia said Osborne was caught 3 days ago with sophisticated radio equipment able to transmit via a U.S. satellite. The U.S. State Department confirmed the expulsion but would not comment on the charge. The last known expulsion of a U.S. diplomat from Moscow was 5 years ago. Donald McLean, the British diplomat who spied for the Soviet Union during the height of the Cold War, reportedly has died in Moscow. He was 69. McLean fled to the Soviet Union in 1951. He, along with British diplomats Kim Philby and Guy Burgess, were part of one of history's most infamous spy rings. While posted to Washington in the late 1940s, McLean turned over to the Soviets some of the West's most valuable atomic secrets.
If it concerns you,
well,
it concerns...
There you are. What happened just then was that Dan Rather addressed the screen for 74 seconds. When you think that they've only got about 22 minutes to do this extremely visual, hectic news program, 74 seconds is an extraordinary and considerable length of time. Rather is very good at looking at the lens and talking compellingly for 74 seconds. In fact, he could probably talk for the whole 22 minutes without any difficulty. That's one reason why they pay him millions of dollars to do it. But there are a few things I want to draw your attention to. First of all, I want you to look at the body language. I mean, these guys are in a sort of kabuki theater situation. They're in a straitjacket. I mean, if he was to say, or any of the newscasters were to say, over now to Washington, you would get some sort of comic response. You can't do that. You have to sit here absolutely like a mummy with this desk, with all of the authority that the desk brings, and address this lens without blinking and tell the folks like it is. Well, like it is turns out to be something more like a dream than reality. There's a sort of dream logic at work, isn't there? A US spy story in Moscow, followed by a British spy who spied for the other side, followed by the El Salvador story. What links these three things? Well, they're all about commies, one way or another. It's like a classic example of a non-narrative, you know, at one level. You know, the sort of story that says, Mary has a little lamb, lambs come from New Zealand was discovered by Captain Cook, cooks are always male, unless they're housewives. That sort of logic. But at another level, there's a considerable logic at stake. The cohesiveness of putting three stories about communists together, pigeonholing them, organizing the very few 14, 15, 20 stories they tell us in these broadcasts, organizing those stories in this way is really the most important job they do. They set an agenda, a social agenda of what's important. It might not be important to us. Certainly my day last Thursday was not affected one way or the other by any of the stories that Rather just told me. But being told this collectively is really important. At another level, putting all the commies in one basket therefore makes perfect sense. Let's just look at the big story for a second. The big story on the night we recorded was El Salvador. I'm very interested in the local news. The local news,
$110 million in military aid for El Salvador. He says U.S. security is at stake on the battlefields of Central America. In a speech to the National Association,
if it concerns us, it concerns you. Or rather, if it concerns you, it concerns us. It seems to me that should be rewritten. It should actually say, if it concerns you and it's a fire, we'll report it. When they haven't got fires, they're always seeking desperately local angles. Here's how one of the local newses dealt with the El Salvador story that last Thursday, in fact.
El Salvador by sending U.S. troops into combat. But he did suggest that if Congress fails to approve all the funds he's seeking, more U.S. advisors will have to be sent in.
We think the best way is to provide training outside of El Salvador, in the United States or elsewhere. But that costs a lot more. So the number of U.S. trainers in El Salvador will depend upon the resources available.
But House Speaker Tip O'Neill says the president will have to do a lot of selling to a reluctant Congress.
But there's a strong feeling that the president is really going too far. And there's a strong feeling among many that the whole situation is grossly overblown.
In New York today, former President Richard Nixon said he agrees with the Reagan approach.
We should have in mind that the guerrilla forces aren't fighting with pitchforks.
Now, where are they getting that? They don't produce that equipment. They're getting it from Nicaragua. Nicaragua's getting it from Cuba. Cuba's getting it from the Soviet Union.
And
Did
President
you like that?
Reagan...
Did you like the local guy that appeared at the end there? You might remember who he was. I'm always very interested in how the local newsrooms seek these New York angles on things. I can remember during the Afghan invasion, they disappeared into Brooklyn, I suppose, or somewhere, and they found some Afghanis. There's no nationality on earth that you can't find in Brooklyn, of course. But what really struck me on that incident was that they then, the following day, found three recently arrived elderly Russian Jewish immigrants sitting, staring at the waves at Brighton Beach, and they asked them what they thought of their government's response. I mean, you couldn't have fairer than that. I've never seen a better example of balance. You know, really what we need to know at this point is, you know, in the words of Butch Cassidy, who are these guys? Who are they? And we've prepared a small tape to sort of indicate how they actually are not the poorest kids on the block, and that they represent a whole range of interest and corporate ideals and so on, which, even if they're at loggerheads with the administration at one point or another, means that their arguments are very much of a sort of one-hand clapping. We've got, I hope, a tape that we can go to at this time. I don't know. People are waving at me. Oh, there's another 15 seconds to go. If I actually just stopped talking for 15 seconds, you would then know how long Dan Rather spoke for 74. It's an interminable length of time. But you see, they've got better equipment than we have. We're in this building provided by Time Life, your local cable operator, and believe me, it's not very plush. In fact, this is the first evening I've been in here when it hasn't caught fire.
We had a date for 10 o'clock. You said you had to watch Brother Alfred Hitchcock. Marshall Dillon in the Twilight Zone. Yabba dabba doo, it's Fred Flintstone. You ain't nothing. I put a TV fanatic, don't give me no static. And now I know why you're acting so silly. I believe you some kin to the Beverly Hillbillies, or maybe a niece, a cousin or a daughter. Tell me Winston tastes good like a cigarette out. You're nothing. I put a TV fanatic, don't give me no static. And when we go out, the people stop and stare, 'cause you're wearing a hat you got from Yogi Bear. I'm afraid I'm gonna put you down if you don't take off that badge you got from Huckleberry Hound, yeah. Now if it ain't been Casey, it's Dr. Kildare, Rocky and his friend of that Yogi Bear. Search for tomorrow, then the garden light, as the world turns into the edge of night. I say you're nothing. I put a TV fanatic, don't give me no static. I say you're nothing. I put a TV fanatic.
I knew you'd go far in my white convertible car, reclining in my seat, lying back in this heat. Look me up on Channel 3. So sophisticated, charming and educated.
It's not true that the news consists only of talking heads. They do actually try and get action, but they don't succeed very well. That's the point I'm trying to make. Let me show you another story recorded this time from NBC last night. This is a very typical deployment of all of the resources that they have available for them. Here it is. Hit it.
Reid, one of President Reagan's special assistants on national security, said today he will leave the administration next month. Reid's presence apparently is beginning to embarrass the White House. He has denied any wrongdoing, But the government says in 1981 he turned a $3,000 stock investment into a $427,000 profit by trading on insider information from his father. Here's Andrea Mitchell.
The president was told that his close friend and national security consultant Thomas Reed would leave the White House by the beginning of next month because of the controversy surrounding the 1981 stock deal. Spokesman Larry Speake said the National Security Council did not have a problem with Reed's background when he was hired and thoroughly reviewed the case. But NBC News has learned that the stock fraud case was not reviewed by the NSC until 4 months after Reed was on the job. Speakes also tried to distance Reed from the president, saying he was only an honorary special assistant to the president and soon would be a former honorary special assistant. But when Mr. Reagan created the MX Commission, Reed was put on it as his point man. And in interviews, he sounded very much like what he is, a close Reagan advisor, especially on the MX.
My advice to the president is to be firm on the matter of do not let basing become the hook for delaying the deployment of MX.
Yeah, listen, everybody out there. Let's stop this nonsense. I think we've seen enough. Look, you know, this is very interesting, this story. I just want you to look at it and understand the rather involved language that's being used, visual language that's being used. It's not an exciting visual language, but it is complicated. Just behind Roger Mudd's shoulder, you know, over here, out of focus, you saw the Capitol. If he had been sitting there, he was probably about, what, 60 feet off the ground, you know, with a camera 30 feet off the ground looking up at him. It's interesting, it's 7 o'clock at night, but folks, it's still light in Washington, you notice, because there was a blue sky at the Capitol. The other elements of the story are equally complex. You have to learn how to decode them. We all do it automatically, but when you stop and think about it, I find it extremely strange. I mean, you saw the images of the tall white guys again. That's a breaking story. That's how you know it's politics. How do they report politics? They report politics by photographing either these tall white guys in long shot. They do two things in long shot. They get in and out of their limousines, or they walk in and out of big buildings, doors, right? And occasionally they settle down, all the congressmen, for instance, settle down in front of that set of faked books that they all use, you know. And that's how they talk to you. So you either get them in long shot walking about, or you get them like this, you know, talking to you. There is, you know, absolutely no way of visualizing these stories. Now, what's really interesting is, despite the so-called tyranny of the visuals, these are serious newsmen, and I'm not kidding about that. Their agenda is the agenda of the New York Times, not of the more rabid Rupert Murdoch-style sheets that are put out in this town. They actually take themselves seriously. They have an important social function to do. They've got to set the agenda for the nation. They can't lead off with, you know, blonde showgirl discovered in Midtown Flat, you know. They can't do that sort of thing, and indeed they tend not to. They lead with the serious stories. It can be inflation, it can be political stories. They might never have the hope in hell of getting a picture, but they're going, I beg your pardon, they're going to lead with it because that's what they're really concerned about. What they then deploy are these shots of people talking, these long shots of people, and even in total desperation, you know, I'm not offering any prizes for recognizing that rather palatial house that appeared in the middle. You know, the still photograph, the palatial house, floodlit. Did you recognize that, folks? My God, you know, they really busted a gut to get that image. I understand and sympathize with the predicament of these people. They spend a lot of time and effort trying to get hold of visual material. And the fact that the visual material is actually about as interesting as your bowl of breakfast cereal is lost in the rush to get it. Occasionally, however, they do come up with something, and I don't want you to get the impression that they're without imagination, sensitivity, or a sense of right and wrong. Let's look at this Lex piece of tape. This is a really interesting piece of tape, which we just happened to stumble across.
A nationwide journalistic debate has arisen over when basic questions of humanity take precedence in covering a news story. What's causing this controversy is a piece of videotape aired on an Alabama television station which showed a man attempting to kill himself. Dennis Trout has that story.
This news tape is what the argument's all about. Some people in Jacksonville say its existence alone raises questions of journalistic ethics and basic humanitarian considerations. The tape shows Cecil Andrews, an unemployed roofer, trying to kill himself, allegedly to protest unemployment. He'd called WHMA-TV of Anniston.
I really don't want to be... Take it off the screen. I mean, this is really very interesting. This is total voyeuristic rubbish, and I don't want to be party to it. I just want to make a few points about it. You know why they blacked out the guy's head? It's because in case he tries it again, none of you will be able to recognize him and stop it. I mean, it's a real outrage. And they're really astonishing when they get onto this tack. I mean, the tape belongs to a television station. I don't know. Maybe they gave it to the networks. It's likely that they charged them for it. The whole nexus of money and access and all of these things is not mentioned in the story. The story is all to do with how this news crew watched the guys in the vague hope that the police would intervene and stop them. But what's not addressed in the news story here, in the ABC story, is what would have happened if the police had stopped them. They'd have got a terrific piece of tape. That's how they got into the bind in the first case. The fact that the poor character's deranged, that he's actually in real trouble, doesn't occur to any of these people. And privileging this story by putting it on the national news is entirely to do with the tyranny of pictures. That's where they're at. You know, in the final analysis, if they can fix something like this, then they're absolutely delighted and entirely happy to fix it. We have actually looked at this story very briefly because I actually don't see how I can morally replay it to you while making these charges against them. There's a real sense, though, that what's happening in these news programs all the time is that you're getting 22 minutes or whatever of stories that have been chosen according to an elaborately agreed agenda of what constitutes importance, what we should think is important. It's a way of holding the nation together. It's very interesting. They're in competition with each other, but they frequently run almost the same stories all the way down the bulletins. There's no real competition. There's agreement about what the nation should be thinking, what's important. The social agenda setting function is absolutely crucial. And, you know, at the end of these broadcasts, you know, they sort of shuffle their scripts, and after 22 minutes of complete mayhem, of dream logic, of guys trying to burn themselves, of the gold prices, they say, good night. And that's what they actually
has been stuffed into my mold, and you will do as you are told until the rights to you are sold.